I'd like to introduce our first presenter today. Kathleen Kiernan will provide us a brief summary of her career trajectory and encourage us all to change the world in her presentation today.
Colonel, thank you. And thank you for everyone that has come today to interact with us. I'm honored and humbled to be able to present. You've met, let me advance here, you have met Kathy and you have met the panel. Let me introduce you to someone else who's not here today. She's long since passed. Her name was Miss Sullivan. On the left, I listed some of the seminal opportunities in my life that guided my life. And on the right, what I learned from each one of them. Miss Sullivan was my guidance counselor in high school. I had my senior year off in high school, and I was fortunate enough to be part of a program called Outward Bound. Not the one for juvenile delinquents, I always try to qualify that, but for kids that had enough credits to graduate from high school, and some actually took it as a gap year. So that year we spent 3 weeks in the White Mountains learning about teaming and survival skills and the like, and then the rest of the year working in fields in which we were interested. I wanted, as a young kid, to be a criminal attorney. So my first internship in my senior year was with 2 criminal attorneys. I'm 17, and they took me to my first trial, not the kind you see on TV, and it was about incest. And I didn't know what incest was. So it was that start of the opening of the aperture to look at life a little bit differently. Through the course of that year, I worked for the Big Brother, Big Sister organization, I worked for the police department, the court system, and I worked for gynecologists. So the front end of those internships taught me a lot about careers that I was interested in. The back end taught me a lot about life and joy, and had an opportunity to explore things that teenage girls really wonder about but aren't sure. And I remember my first opportunity to see a child born. It changed my life. So now I finished my year, and I went to see Miss Sullivan. And I was very excited. I'm going to be a criminal attorney. I'm going to change the world. And she studied me as I'm speaking about my year. And she said, and I said, Miss Sullivan, I really want to go to college. I can't wait. And we're going to do this, we're going to do that. And she just looked at me with all seriousness and said, interesting, Kathleen. Actually, they called me Kathy in those days. She said, I think you should get married, get a blue-collar job, and stay in Worcester, Massachusetts. Some 4 degrees later, in everyone that I received, I would toast Miss Sullivan and say, thank you for inspiring me, even though I knew that wasn't your intention to do. I don't hold her responsible really in any way other than propelling me on a path that I was meant to go on. Developmentally, she thought young girls should either be that nurse or the teacher, my mom was a nurse, or stay at home, raise children, and that was their lot in life. What she taught me was relentlessness, and not to take a no for anything that I wanted to do ever. To go out and earn that experience and earn that education, and then you always have a seat at the table and you always have a voice in whatever the discussion is. So I thank her for that. My first job, my first real job when I went on to college, which was at Northeastern University, and that was cooperative education, was a uniformed police officer. So here I am now at age 19. I'm in a pre-law program. I'm wearing a police uniform, graduate from a police academy, and I'm carrying a gun that I'm not legally old enough to buy. Fascinating life experience. And why I say the uniform of authority, when you're in a uniform, regardless of whether it's an Army uniform or a service uniform or police or a fire or emergency management uniform, people expect you to solve every problem there is. Wonderful opportunity to open that aperture even a little bit more. It taught me interpersonal skills and diplomacy, listening to the problem sets. As bizarre as some of them were, and they really were, they expected me to solve them. Taught me a lot. My training officer, and I know it's an old adage, was my training officer is now my husband. We've been together 43 years, and if you talk with him, he'd tell you that training still continues. The next, if you're familiar with the book, Three Cups of Tea, it was all about understanding culture and context and learning about things that you were unfamiliar with. To me, it was always more like 300 gallons of tea. And what I mean by that is having, and on the right, you'll see strategic patience. Understanding that you meet people where they are, that never go in with a bias or preconceived idea. I've now graduated from college and I'm a federal agent. And one of our duties as a federal agent is always to look for fugitives, somebody that is on the lam, basically. And here's how I learned about drinking tea. I would go to some hard-pressed neighborhoods in Massachusetts looking for the fugitives, and you do all your normal protocols, last known address, former colleagues, family, and those kinds of things. Then I realized something to me that was hidden in plain sight. There's folks that are in those neighborhoods that don't work anymore, they're retired, mostly older women, some older men, and I always called it, in a respectful way, the blue hair factor. They stay in their house, and they peek out through the windows, but they know everything that moves and doesn't move in that neighborhood. And I would introduce myself and spend afternoons just drinking tea and listening to their life story, because life is all about stories. Their family, what they have done in their jobs, what their neighborhood was all alike, and where were the people that belonged there? And they would always tell me, well, Mike will come home, not Mother's Day, but 2 days before. And he'll come in the back alley and he'll do this and he'll do that. Joe will come home 2 days before. It was always 2 days. It was always fascinating to me. 2 days before Christmas Eve. And he'll always come very early in the morning after the father has gone to work, and he'll come in to see his mom. And I capture a lot of fugitives that way. And I learned same culture context traveling the world, which I had an opportunity to do through my career, is sit down, have that strategic patience, listen to someone's life story, and you'll make the bond, and that will pay dividends forever. And I mean in a good way. If you have a relationship with people, they're less likely to raise a fist or pull a gun or pull a knife. I've interacted with some interesting folks throughout my career and never had a problem. It's because I sought to understand them, where they came from, where they were going, and that any errors or mistakes or crimes that they had committed was not the whole of them. It was just something that happened. And we'd talk about that, and oftentimes it'd end up like this, and as often it would end up these folks would come back out in society and either be a confidential informant as part of their giving back to society or find some better pathway in life, and I always took great pride in that. And the last, minding the gap. The old British expression when they did the first underground in the UK, because it was a taxation issue, and they couldn't buy all the property that was contiguous to the underground. So the train tracks actually went like this. They still do. And there is a quintessential comment from, with a British accent, says, mind the gap now, mind the gap when you're stepping out of the train so that you wouldn't fall between the platform and exiting the train. It was something that I always thought about, that there were opportunities, there were seams almost in law enforcement, I'd say the space between the cases. Something that doesn't quite make a criminal case, but there's enough there to pay more attention to it. Well, in that career pursuit, I found there were different kinds of gaps. And the first one, because I was young in my career or young in law enforcement, where the stats were really, in alcohol, tobacco, and firearms, we had 12 women when I joined. And that went down at one juncture to 6. And now it's probably about, for the whole agency, probably about 12%, so still way below the national average. So as a result, I really never had a mentor. Women were kind of suspect in those days, and it's just a life experience. So the men really didn't want to mentor, and there were no senior women. So I sought that mentoring where I could find it on the job, but often off the job in local police departments that were more likely to say any set of hands or any person that can help us do something is a good thing. So I found a lot of experience there. But I made the vow in that time that I would always be a mentor. I would be a mentor for the rest of my life because that's what people need, and take whatever experience I had and share that with whomever I met. So the gap was there was no, you can't meet everyone. I had an opportunity to match, my classroom assignment was match high technology with qualitative research. This was in 2003, and I decided to build a website. Website's called sameshield.com. Now the joke of that was at the time I was going to call it sameshield.differentrules.com, but it was too much to type, so I went to, seriously, to sameshield.com. And it was to trace women who have made a difference in the field of law enforcement, starting in the late 1700s, when a freed slave traveled to Nova Scotia and gave herself the title of America's first policewoman. The National Association of Black Law Enforcement Officers, to this day, gives a scholarship in her name, and her name was Rose Fortune. And then, again, that aperture continues to open. I thought, well, same shield, different rules.com. No, that's not so important anymore. Demonstrate as a virtual mentor what leadership looks like. So I traced Rose Fortune forward for all the women in law enforcement, then all the women in the military, then all the women in the intelligence community through all the conflicts we've had, and then all the women in the private sector. Kathy Francis was recently put on the site, and we're talking about all the women in emergency management now. So define what success looks like and give folks around the world, and I've done that for a global audience. Without sponsorship, it's all about education and learning, and to this day, I went live in 2003, I get some fascinating emails saying, thank you for helping me make a better career choice. Thank you for changing the world. Thank you for the research and the case studies that help me make better decisions. Another gap. Crafty Bastards, also an interesting story. About mid-career, I had an opportunity to be tailed to the intelligence community, and also towards the later part of my career to work as a technical advisor to the Department of Defense. And in that, well, both jobs actually, but mostly the Department of Defense, we would have tabletop exercises and scenario opportunities where you'd say, what does the world look like from a warfare perspective in 2020 or 2025 or 2030? Intellectually stimulating, cognitively flexible skills, but here was the problem. The end game was fairly predictable, and I say this with all due respect, but we took the same folks, we did it in law enforcement. You don't want your peers to fail in public, so you don't let them. We'd take different services who were doctrinally locked within the bounds of their own service. They hadn't really been given permission to think about what the world would look like in 2020 or 2025 or 2030, and they made decisions based on their training. So a senior at Department of Defense said to me, hey, Kathleen, I think we should change the nature of the game. I said, okay, sir, what does that mean? He said, well, you know, I want you to bring the folks into the game, the kinds of folks that you run around the world with. And I'm giving him that look like Miss Sullivan gave to me, and I said, okay, sir. He said, you know, the cops, the robbers, the malcontents, those confidential informants, those kinds of folks. I said, okay, sir, I'll do that. And I did, and it changed the nature of the game. And what we realized then was that if you bring a different mix of people and you recombine the earned experience of all of them, they will look at a problem set differently. And that's where Crafty Bastards came from. Now, it has a Latin term because you can't really use Crafty Bastards in DoD or intelligence community communications. It's Vociferi Versuti. And we have actually been using that at the national level for the Department of Defense, for the intelligence community, for the Department of Homeland Security, to bring different levels of experience from around the world, actually, to solve hard problem sets. And the methodological approach takes 17 different attack vectors, different kinds of way to think about a hard problem. So we have a lot of fun with that. And the last, another one, and it's, I think, akin to what everybody in the room thinks about, is in the new normal of active shooter or active threat, and the kinds of things that we didn't really think about would happen in our classrooms or our places of employment or our houses of worship or where we serve, those kinds of things, is now becoming a new normal. And what we realized, we've had the honor and pleasure of teaching for the Department of Homeland Security and reaching out across the community for a different series of workshops. And I realized that you cannot workshop your way out of this problem. You need to have an educational approach that starts K to 12, starting with the young kids to teach them about preparedness and have a security sense, as common sense discussion in the classroom that is not, it's not giving fear to the kids, it's replacing that fear with confidence. And that's the preparedness without paranoia. We've rolled that out in classrooms across the country, lots of resources, most of which we just give away for free because it's the right thing to do. And happy to talk about that a little bit later. And then last, leadership fuel. Kathy said, well, what makes you successful? And that's a hard question. So here are some of the things. Celebrate next, not first. It's interesting, and I bet everybody at this table has had a lot of series of firsts in their life. You were first at this and first at that, because it's when we came on the job and when we entered our professions. But if you're first and last, it doesn't really mean anything. The first will be a memory for you as you get older, but I don't want it to be the only memory of that occupation or that profession or that experience. Always reach your hand back, be that mentor to bring the next person up to be able to change the world, and give them the benefit of your experience, the good and the bad and the ugly, because if you tell them it's only good, that's not really realistic at all. Understanding the math, it's kind of, in my mind, the phenomenology of it all, that I always wanted people who had walked the same ground to teach me about it, and that's the earned experience. If you can take that earned experience and back that up with academic rigor, to me, you become that pracademic. And that's a skill set that we use in classrooms. Again, I have the honor to teach at Johns Hopkins and out at the Naval Postgraduate School, where we bring in the practitioners who are all afraid of this terrible master's program. Oh my God, I'm never going to pass this. You know, I solve all these hard problems, but this is frightening to them. And then I explain that all the experience they bring into the classroom is going to make them excel as an academic. And we teach them that academic rigor, and then we push them out the door as the pracademic, and most of them come back and pursue their doctorate. So it's a pretty exciting place to be. I think mentoring is an obligation and a responsibility, and it's lifelong. And even if you're not in the profession you started with, that culmination of experience, that convergence of life experience helps you to teach that next generation. Change the narrative when you must, whether that is the guidance teacher or anyone in a classroom or anybody on any job that tells you you can't. Give them an opportunity to show them that you can. Never take whatever you are in as, this is my calling card. To me, gender always was a bonus, particularly working undercover and those kinds of experiences. But it was never a calling card for me. To me, competence trumps everything that you do. And then anything else that you bring to the game is an enhancement. And I think, lastly, learn the golden rule of strategic patience. It will help you make those difficult decisions when you need to, and it'll make the easy decisions easier. It's hard sometimes not to rush to judgment, say, geez, I've been here before, I know exactly what's going to happen. It's really looking at the culture and context and the environment you're in and making a decision that way.